In this video, we're going to learn everything about the G20 Summit that started on 21st November 2020. It was scheduled to take place in Riyadh, the capital city of Saudi Arabia, on 21st and 22nd November 2020. However, due to the pandemic, it was held virtually. And that goes for every meeting, not just G20. As you can figure out, G20 means grouping of 20 countries. There are 19 countries plus the European Union. Under European Union, as you know, there are 27 member states. Previously it was 28. The United Kingdom withdrew from the European Union on 31st January 2020. This international forum was founded in 1999 with the aim to discuss policy related to the promotion of international financial stability. In simple words, as you know, globalization is the connection of different parts of the world. And the primary reason is because of trade and technology, which has made the world into a connected and interdependent place. So if the idea is to connect the world, then the economy also have to connect. For example, if you and I come into a union, then my happiness will somewhat depend on you, and vice versa. Similarly, due to globalization, every country's economy connect in some way or the other. There is an interdependency. Now because of that, we also need a stability mechanism. So as I said, if you and I come into a union, my happiness will somewhat depend on you and vice versa. That means there has to be a central mechanism that binds both of us in such a way that if one of us is going through a downfall, even still there is a collective stability between the two. That is exactly what the objective of the G20 grouping is. If you look at the member countries that are part of this group, they pretty much form the entire global economy. Of course, within this group, there are big players like the US, China, Russia, France, UK, etc. All the so-called United Nations veto members. And then there are emerging economies like India, South Africa, South Korea, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, etc. But the economies of all these member nations together form the global economy. When there are so many stakeholders, then there has to be a central mechanism that ensures some stability. And that is what the aim of this grouping is. To discuss policy related to the promotion of international financial stability. The 2020 summit has been hosted by Saudi Arabia, and the king or the head of Saudi Arabia is Salman bin Abdul Aziz. As you know, the entire world is facing the consequences of the pandemic that started earlier in 2020. So obviously, any global meeting has to address the problems as well as the solutions regarding the losses caused by the pandemic. You then have to divide these problems in these categories. Under the humanitarian category, the need of the hour is the development and distribution of vaccine. The G20 leaders discussed about the development and distribution of vaccine. As you know, almost every trade bloc, whether it is the recent formation of the RCEP trade bloc or the BRICS summit, almost every regional, bilateral or global grouping of nations are talking about how to develop and distribute vaccines at an affordable rate. Of course, you all know that financing the development and distribution of a vaccine is not an easy thing. It requires collaboration, funding and government intervention for procurement as well as distribution. However, you also have to understand that rich developed countries have advanced technology. So obviously their research, expertise and knowledge will be at a sophisticated level. And that will not come free of cost. That means the knowledge, technology, economy and the money supply will be concentrated in the hands of few at the expense of the majority. This is also the harsh truth behind all these international summit and conferences. Anyhow, the G20 leaders agreed to make COVID-19 vaccines available and affordable for all, but more funding is needed. That is why the G20 leaders have together committed to fund $4.5 billion gap by the end of this year. The $4.5 billion amount is for mass procurement and delivery of COVID-19 tools and COVAX facility. COVAX is a global initiative to ensure that people in all corners of the world will get access to COVID-19 vaccines once they are available, regardless of their wealth. It was launched in April 2020 by the World Health Organization, the European Commission and France in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. There is also a private American organization called Gavi. The full form is Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, which is partially or maybe fully owned by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So this organization, along with the WHO, the European Commission and France, have taken up the responsibility of developing the COVID-19 vaccine. So basically the $4.5 billion amount will largely go to Gavi, WHO, the European Commission and France. Try to relate this point with what I said. The vaccine will be available from a developed nation, but at the expense of the majority. So on one hand, it's a good thing that there will be a vaccine, but on the other hand, the knowledge, technology, economy and the money supply will be concentrated in the hands of few. The next point that comes under the humanitarian category is regarding climate change. If you remember the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change, almost every nation on earth had signed the Paris Climate Agreement. And if you also remember, in 2017, the United States was the first country to formally withdraw from it. And the reason was, as per the Paris Agreement, the United States had to cut down on its carbon emission. In other words, the US had to cut down its energy usage, especially coal and oil. President Trump was not in favor of it, and hence the US withdrew from the agreement. Anyhow, with regards to climate change, Saudi Arabia, who is also the host of the G20 Summit, promoted the concept of circular carbon economy. The concept of a circular carbon economy revolves around 4 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle and remove. As we know, US withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement. That also means presently in the G20 Summit, apart from the US, everyone agrees with the concept of circular carbon economy. In the coming months, President Trump will leave the White House, and the newly elected President Joe Biden has pledged to rejoin the deal on his first day in office. That means in the next year's session of G20 Summit, which will be held in Italy, the United States is going to get back in the climate deal. As far as India is concerned, it is said that India has exceeded its own share of the Paris Agreement deal. Prime Minister Modi highlighted a number of actions taken by the Indian government to reduce the carbon dioxide emission per year. Some of those actions are making LED lights popular, which is saving 38 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions per year. Then smoke-free kitchens being provided to 80 million households. Then elimination of single-use plastics. After that, expansion of forest cover. Restoring 26 million hectares of degraded land by 2030. Then achieving 175 gigawatt of renewable energy aimed at reducing carbon footprint and preventing climate change. And finally, don't forget India's biggest initiative with respect to renewable energy is the International Solar Alliance, whose headquarters is in Gurgaon, India. It is an 88-member nation organization that aims to promote research and development in renewable energy. Since it is in India, so India leads this organization. So naturally, if such a big initiative is taken by any country's government, they will mention that in the international conference to make everyone aware of its progress. One more point under the humanitarian category is regarding the role of WHO and bring reforms in it. If you all remember, the World Health Organization has been at the center of many controversies since the beginning of this pandemic. The WHO has been accused of supporting China in its initial cover-up about the outbreak. And you also must be aware that it was the United States who was quite vocal in criticizing the WHO publicly. And India also supported the US in this narrative. Even in the BRICS summit that happened a week ago, Prime Minister Modi called for reforms. Not just in WHO, he even called for reforms in WTO and IMF. In the coming months, the US president is going to change. And if you look at the UN veto countries, apart from China, India has pretty much good relations with the remaining 4 countries. So only time will tell how much India's call for reforms in the United Nations will be heard. By the way, India, Germany, Brazil and Japan have formed the G4 bloc, so they can collectively put pressure on getting permanent membership in the United Nations Security Council. This proves how much India wants reforms in the United Nations international policies. But as of now, just remember that the World Health Organization has to perform the duties of global health leadership. In simple words, whenever there is any epidemic or pandemic around the world, it is the WHO who gets the first information and also gets to form necessary guidelines. But in this current pandemic situation, this organization has been heavily criticized for being a tool of Chinese politics, power and propaganda. Hence, there has been a serious call from many countries in bringing reforms. India is one such country. Plus, it is a well-known fact that the United Nations is primarily dominated by the veto countries on international issues, and almost every country in the world realizes it. That is why there is a strong demand by many countries for a permanent membership. When you can't accomplish a task alone, then you need a group, and that is the main purpose behind the formation of G4 bloc. Under the economic category, Prime Minister Modi called for a new global index for post-corona world. So what is this new global index? You must have noticed in the last 7 months, Government of India has indulged in micromanaging the crisis by adding new levels of bureaucracy and laws. So if I have to summarize the government's activities from last 7 months, they have basically reset the society in almost every aspect. In history, we follow the time in terms of before Christ, BCE, and AD, which is called Anno Domini. Likewise, the new timeline from 2020 seems to be before Corona and after Corona. Have a look at this image, you will be able to relate these changes that have significantly shaped the world going forward. Anyhow, this new global index is sort of an indicator or measure in creating a nation that has vast pool of talent. Then the respective country's government policies are such that it ensures technology reaches all segments of the society. Then it also highlights transparency in systems of governance. You must have seen World Poverty Index, then World Happiness Index. So there are many variety of metrics that have been created in measuring certain objectives. Likewise, Prime Minister Modi has appealed to the G20 leaders for creating a new global index that contains certain measurements which ranks countries based on how well they did and how well they are in dealing with such a pandemic. You see, with this kind of metric, a country can promote and market its own qualities in getting foreign investment, both in terms of business and technology. This way, a country can gain respect among the international members. After all, so many countries are part of this G20 summit. Imagine this like your office meeting. When so many people in your team attend the meeting and everybody has something to say, you also feel like coming up with great initiative and ideas, right? After all, you want to be known among your peers, right? Plus, also think of it this way. Every major economy in the world has been badly hit due to this pandemic. That means in some way, everyone is going to get a level playing field. I will explain this with an example. Let's say there is a famous shop near your house from where everyone buy goods. Now due to lockdown, that shop was closed for 4 to 5 months. Now that the businesses are restarting, no matter how much that old shop was famous, if at all there is another new shop that opens at a nearby place, even that new shop is going to attract good amount of customers. So the point I'm trying to say is, this pandemic has caused some damage to some people. At the same time, it has also been good to some people. Now let's say if there is a new global index, almost every economy in the world is badly hurt. Now that the unlock process has started, both the developed as well as developing countries are going to get a level playing field to restart their economy. While it may be hard for developed nations to restart again, at the same time for developing countries it can turn out to be a new opportunity. So that is the concept behind this new global index idea. Prime Minister Modi has also highlighted the Indian IT sector. As you all must be aware that India is the hub of global sourcing market. In other words, businesses around the world seek India as the most cost-efficient location for IT services and business process management. India is the leading sourcing destination across the world, accounting for approximately 55% market share of global services sourcing business in 2019. The computer software and hardware sector in India attracted a total foreign direct investment of worth $45 billion between April 2000 and March 2020. The IT sector ranked second in FDI inflow as per the data released by Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. Then leading Indian IT firms like Infosys, Wipro, TCS and Tech Mahindra are offering services in blockchain technology and artificial intelligence to many global clients. Then in the year 2019, National Policy on Software Products was passed by Union Cabinet to develop India as a software producing nation. Anyhow, it is a well-known fact that India is the topmost offshoring destination for IT companies across the world. And we also know that during the lockdown, how technology made life easy. The government used it in transferring money to beneficiaries' accounts. People heavily relied on cashless transaction, part of maintaining social distancing. And then work from anywhere became the new style in the post-COVID world. So naturally, with all of this, Prime Minister Modi had to mention about the Indian IT sector for handling the digital needs of the G20 nations. There has been a discussion regarding trade. It was recommended that the big economies should work to provide trillions of dollars in trade financing for developing countries to ensure the recovery of the global economy from the pandemic. Let me give you a simple example to make you understand this. Let's say a developed country named A imports certain vegetable from a developing country named B. That means country B is the producer of that vegetable. When crops do not move and factories are idle throughout the country B, then it will affect the import of country A. Of course, country A has the option of buying it from country C. But it is recommended that if country A can take initiative of financing the trade with country B, this way if many of the developing countries are supported financially, then that will play an important role in global economic recovery. Of course, this also has a negative side. Trade financing can also make the developed countries control the production side of country B. Developing nations can fall into the debt trap. A classic example to make you understand this is look at China. China invested heavily in Pakistan. Today, Pakistan is in debt trap. Infrastructure projects are being set up by the government of Pakistan, and thus the burden of repaying Chinese loans for them will be on the government's shoulders. And you all know any kind of national debt has to be distributed among the general public in the name of tax. And that will increase inflation and also possibly destroy the economy. The same is the case with Sri Lanka. Many of its public investment projects have been financed by China. You can also call it as a debt trap diplomacy. So any kind of trade financing for developing countries can lead to such a debt trap. But that is the negative aspect. However, if done in a good hope, then trade financing for developing countries will definitely be a helping hand for the developing country. And it will also ensure the recovery of the global economy from the COVID-19 pandemic. Now coming to the infrastructure development category, in this G20 summit, there was nothing in particular that was discussed apart from the International Solar Alliance. As I've mentioned, the ISA will contribute to reducing carbon footprint. One more thing that the Prime Minister mentioned was regarding the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. As of now, it has 18 countries, 9 from the G20. Each time a natural disaster occurs anywhere in the world, countries try to provide immediate relief, but there is no focus on building disaster resilient infrastructure. A good example is Japan. Japan has expertise in disaster management, rehabilitation and reconstruction, making it the world's safest and most disaster resilient country. Anyhow, so Prime Minister Modi brought this up again in this year's G20 summit. This initiative could turn out to be a major foreign policy innovation, and it can enhance India's status by serving the needs of the rest of the world. Although I could have placed this point under the humanitarian category, but then there is a need for investment in the physical infrastructure. And by mentioning about it in the G20 summit, Prime Minister Modi tried to bring attention of the members of the G20 summit. Now, if you look at the aim of the G20 summit, the idea is to assemble the countries of the world to address economic and social challenges through international cooperation and shared commitments. That means we are talking about multilateralism. International organizations such as the United Nations, NATO, and the World Trade Organization are multilateral in nature. Any kind of infrastructure finance by bilateral and multilateral principle can help to fill the financial gaps that exist in any infrastructure projects. But you also have to understand that there are many factors that has to be considered. After all, it's about money, right? Some of the factors are government policies, national budget commitments, land use, market regulation, sustainability costs, etc. So basically there has to be a framework that can connect all the members of the G20 to initiate such multilateral infrastructure projects. As of now, there is no such framework that exists in the G20 grouping. However, you have to realize that such multilateral projects work well in smaller groupings. As we know that many of the members of G20 are also part of other regional and bilateral trade bloc. So talking about multilateralism in a big forum like G20 is a way to promote the idea among the nations who can then exercise it within their respective regional and bilateral groupings. After all, the governors of the central banks of these respective countries also participate in the summit. They always keep an eye on other countries' potential and growth. If they come across anything profitable, they definitely approach them and propose their interests. Now coming to the category of security, under this we have to talk about terrorism. If you all remember, recent terrorist attacks in France and Austria has triggered massive fear among the members of the European Union and the United Kingdom. In fact, this was brought up in the G20 summit, and all the leaders of the G20 nations have strongly condemned it and have asked for a strong coordinated approach. Now think about it this way. All the major economies are present in this G20 summit. These countries have state-of-the-art technology and surveillance system. Do you think it will be that difficult for these countries to track the financial activities that support terrorist operations? Always remember this point. In international relations, there are no permanent friends and enemies. There's only permanent interests. So let's say if country A has information regarding terrorist financing and country B wants it. Do you think country A is going to hand over the information just like that? Obviously, there has to be some give and take, right? There is a lot of bureaucracy and diplomacy that you have to go through even to get a small piece of information. While it looks very simple from outside that all the countries should work together and they can defeat terrorism, but in reality that's not true. It's all about interest and you have to give something in order to get something. So talking about terrorism in the G20 summit is again an initiative. Since 2008 till 2019, G20 summits have dedicated a total of 6,500 words to terrorism in their publicly released statements. However, the member nations do realize and recognize the interconnection between terrorism and other issues such as climate change, displacement, migration, right and left-wing extremism, returning foreign fighters, and online radicalization. And then the individual country responds to this information in their own capacity. Again, smaller grouping of countries are better in handling situations like this as compared to a bigger grouping like G20. But one thing is for sure, to deal with terrorism, you need state-of-the-art technology and surveillance system. So as far as India is concerned, it is looking for anti-terrorism strategies, technology, and joint collaboration of counter-terrorist forces and agencies. So these were the things that were discussed in the G20 summit. I hope you found this video informative. Thank you for watching it.